Hey everyone, welcome back to our Epoxy Resin Wood Basics video series. I'm Sean from Craft Elements, and in this video we're going to be talking about planing and slab leveling, which is how do you get a piece like this, which has your resin and wood at a different level, to this, where everything's nice and flat, straight and level. And that, of course, is using a planer, a slab leveler, or a CNC machine. We're going to look at all three of those today. This is going to be a shorter video, I hope, so let's get started. I want to preface this video by saying if you're a resin artist and you're only working with resin, you're not mixing resin and wood, maybe you're just doing full resin pours or you're doing like resin art on top of wood, this is really not the video for you. This is, if you're using a planer or a slab leveler, this is really a video specific to people that are working with resin and wood. You're going to combine them and you want to level them before your final finishing stage. If you're just doing resin projects, doing resin art, you do not even need to bother with this stuff. So I just want to say that in case you get confused, like, well, do I need this machine if I'm doing this? Probably not. You really need a planer or a slab leveler or CNC if you're doing resin and wood specific pieces. So the first thing I want to talk about is a planer. A planer, to be honest, if you don't know what it is going to be a shop necessity, especially if you're working with small resin and wood projects, making charcuterie boards. Even if you're not working with resin and you are just making small wood projects or small wood charcuterie boards, live edge boards, you need a thickness planer. It's really like a non-negotiable point. And essentially what a thickness planer does is, as the name implies, is it reduces the thickness of your material. So whether you have solid wood or wood and resin, you're going to load that into the planer and it's going to use its knives spinning around to take off a layer of your material and get it to a thinner layer. Well, in this case, if you've got two different layers, like in that board where you've got lower resin and higher wood, which would be in most cases, and you want to get that all level, that's going to be the planer's job. Now, the disadvantage of a planer is its limited size in these shop applications. This is a 13-inch DeWalt planer, very, very common. I believe it's around $600 US price point, so relatively affordable, but it's not cheap. However, you can certainly go up to very, very large industrial planers, the Time Savers line of planers, 52, 53 inches, when we're talking about $100,000. So for this purpose of this video, where it's really like a basics, resin wood basics series video, we're talking about these shop planers. They come in 12, maybe 13-inch widths, nothing more. After you get wider than that, you're talking about big money, which is probably beyond the scope of this video. So let's take a look inside this really quickly, just so you can visualize how this thing works. All right, so I've taken the cover off our planer. We're going to unplug it, even though there is a safety latch that won't allow it to turn on if it's plugged in or not, if the cover's not on. But this is the planer. Inside here is the chip collector or dust collector, if you will, and essentially below this is the blades. So once those blades take off all the material, it comes through this ductwork into this fan and out this chute. Now, one thing important to mention is if you're using a planer, ideally you want to have it hooked up to a vacuum system, or at least some sort of a rigged up shop vac that's going to collect all those chips. If you're using this inside and you don't have this connected, it's going to be an absolute disaster. It makes planers make a huge mess because they take off so much material so quickly. Getting this top off here. So you can see in here what we have is a long blade. There's actually 3 of these blades on this spindle. And if I would want to turn it around because I'll probably end up cutting myself, but essentially 3 of these blades, they all spin and that's what's taking the material off. There are also helical planers, and there's actually even a helical head you can get for this, which will essentially be a bar like this, except there's 100 tiny little blades that are replaceable as well, and they end up with a nicer, smoother finish. But to be honest, in almost all cases, something like this is a triple head or a three blade planer, will be sufficient for most projects that you're working on. Talking about this exhaust port, if you don't have it hooked up, use this outside and point this away, because honestly, this will shoot out pieces of wood and debris and resin so fast. You do not want to get that in the face of the eye. And of course, wear your proper PPE when you're using a planer. These things are also incredibly loud, which is why I have my ear protection. But generally that's how it works. It's a very simple device. If you want to set the thickness, you can do so with this dial. And along the sides you have a measurement, right? So you can actually set your level based on that. This one is a double speed planer, so you have a dimensioning version. You have a dimensioning speed and a finishing speed. Finishing speed goes slower to get a nicer finish. Dimensioning is really for quick, runs of, say, raw wood. So if you were taking, a piece of 2x4 lumber, like a spruce piece, and you wanted to reduce the thickness of that, you would use the dimensioning option. You have this over here, which can set the maximum or minimum thickness, so it won't go any lower than that. So that's the basics of the planer, how it works, how it's assembled. And like anything else, just like any other saw or tool in your shop that uses a blade, it's going to need replacing. So those blades are relatively easy to replace. That's why it's accessible like this. You obviously just want to make sure the machine's unplugged. And you can get those blades from Amazon or from DeWalt. And I think they're like $40 to $50 a set of 3. And you'll know that they need replacing if you start having lines, for example, in your material. Maybe the blade's chipped and now it's creating lines in your planed pieces. So you want to replace the blades or switch them. In most cases, the blades are actually dual-sided, so you can actually just take the blade out, switch it around, put it back down, and have a fresh blade. But once, of course, you've used both sides, you want to replace the blades entirely. But the cleaner and sharper the blades, obviously the nicer the finish is coming out of this planer. Now, this is by no means meant to be a safety video or a comprehensive look on everything that you need to know about a planer. It's really just a top-level overview. You definitely want to read the instructions, make sure you've got the right safety measures in place. If you have a vacuum system, attach that. Don't stick your hand in the planer, right? It's really easy to fit your hand under there, or have a kid stick their hand under there while it's running. That will take your fingers or your whole hand off. So it's definitely one of those machines that you don't want to mess around with if you don't know what you're doing. But don't let that intimidate you, because once you know how to use it safely, it's very, very easy to use. I'm going to turn it on right now. The one thing I want to mention too is it's not a magical device. You're not just going to put the piece in and have a perfect piece coming out, especially with harder woods and resin. You're going to want to probably do 3 or 4 passes, i.e. 3 or 4 runs through this, consecutively lowering the planer every time, taking off just a little bit at a time. You do not want to load this in and set it to take a 1/4 inch off. It's going to jam up and it'll be a disaster. You need to take off just a little bit at a time, and they're going to see me doing that in real time here. I'm probably going to speed it up, but at least you're going to see me doing those multiple passes, so you can see what it's going to take to go from this, where we have roughly an 1/8 of an inch gap, to actually a fully flattened piece. So I'm going to put my PPE on, especially my hearing protection, because the planer is really loud, and get going. We're going to set our level based on how it's going into the planer here. There's a removal gauge that goes up and down on the sides that tells you how much it's going to remove. It takes a little bit of trial and error at first, but you'll get the hang of it. Turn it on, make sure. All right, that's it. We've planed down both sides of this, and you can see now that the wood and resin are completely even here. You've got obviously a lot of marks here, striations from the planer blades. To be expected. This is not a perfect finish. This is where you're now going to shape and sand after this. So this leveling stage is, after you pull it from your mold, but before you actually start sanding or trimming or whatever, right? You want to have a nice, flush, level, even piece before you start sanding, or if you're going to trim the sides, you want to make sure it's flat bottom and top. So essentially, yeah, that's how the planer works. Just for fun, I'm going to take this guy and run it through as well. There you go, here's another example. Completely leveled that out with a planer. Now with these planers, you don't want to get too small. Like if you had a piece like this, don't put that in a planer. The knives are going to grab it, it's going to shoot out the other side. You do have a minimum size you need to work with. But yeah, that's how a planer works. We're going to talk about the next step up. Again, not a larger planer, because there certainly are larger planers that are beyond the scope of this video because they are extremely expensive, and if you're spending that much money on a planer, you don't need to be watching this video. So we're going to be talking about slab levelers next. Okay, so what's the point of a slab leveler? Why can't you use a planer? Well, if you haven't figured it out, a planer in most cases is very narrow. That planer that I was just using is good for 12 or 13 inches. So if you want to do a 24-inch table, or you've got a really big thick piece of like a cookie or something that you want to level out, you can't use that little shop planer. So the next stage between the planer and say something like a CNC is a slab leveling jig, also known as a router sled. Now I used to have one. I used to have one in this room, which is now my kids' playroom, because sometimes my kids come to the shop and I need to put them somewhere. Now a slab leveling jig, or a slab leveling sled, or a router sled, those are three terms that all describe the exact same device. And what we're really talking about is a handheld router attached to a rail system. So in most cases, or really in all cases, you've got two main rails. In this video, you can see here, this is actually my woodpecker's jig, or my woodpecker's sled that I was using a little while back before I got a CNC machine. I believe this would do 40 inches by about 8 feet, or 40 inches by 6 feet. And essentially what we're looking at is two long rails and then two opposing short rails that travel along those long rails. On those two shorter rails is the router attached to a base plate assembly that slides along those two shorter rails. So essentially you have complete XY axis movement of your router. The key to having this jig set up like this is it keeps your router at the exact same level or exact same height. So you can go from left to right or side to side, forward to back with your router and level out that slab. Or in this case, if you wanted to do, say, a river table, you could level out that river table. And just like the planer, it's not something you can necessarily do in one step, especially if you don't have, if you have got more than, say, a 1/16 or whatever of material to remove, you typically need to do multiple passes with this slab leveler. So it is quite time consuming. I think in this particular video I've sped it up, but I think that 4x6 table probably took me a good 2 hours. And obviously it made a giant mess because the router, if you've seen our router video, spits out a lot of material. So what actually makes that planing or slab leveling happen? Well, it's a bit like this. And these are actually bits I also use in my CNC. They're known as spoil board bits as well, or you can call them slab leveling bits. But essentially these are just wider bits that as they spin around create a flat surface. They attach to your router, you put it in your router sled, and that's what effectively is cutting down your wood or wooden resin. So what's the advantage of a router sled or a slab leveling jig over, say, a planer? Well, first of all, you get much bigger work area. You can get 12 or 13 inches with a planer, a regular shop planer. You can attach a slab leveling jig or your router sled to a flat worktop that you might already have in your shop, or you can build a table just for it. And you'll end up with a very large area that you can level, which you can't do with a shop planer. But the disadvantage is, of course, that it's very time consuming, creates a lot of a mess, and it's still manual labor. You're moving that router back and forth. Sometimes some of them have sticks on them, you can go with a stick. But it's still manual labor, not like a planer or CNC machine. However, the huge advantage is cost. A quality pre-made, metal or aluminum slab leveling assembly for an average size, 4x6 table would cost you $800 to maybe $1,200, which is a heck of a lot cheaper than a wide format planer and a heck of a lot cheaper than a CNC machine. But of course, like anything else, there are DIY homemade versions. You can actually create your own router sled from some nice wood and a wood box pretty easily. There's videos all over YouTube on how to make a router sled out of wood, and you can build one for 50 bucks. I would only recommend that if you're doing the occasional large project. If you're going to be using it on a regular basis and you're going to be actually serious about making stuff for yourself or as a business, get a proper router sled, a slab leveler, or a CNC. Before discussing this CNC machine and showing you how that works to level a slab, I want to talk about what I'm referring to as essentially a hybrid. It's more than a slab leveling jig or a router sled, but it's not quite a CNC machine. There are very few pieces of hardware that fall into this category, but the big one that comes to mind is the Slab Miser from Wood Miser. So Wood Miser has been around for many, many years, and they're known for their portable sawmills and other big, large format wood cutting machines. They have a machine that's called the Slab Miser, and it is essentially somewhere between a CNC machine and a slab leveler. It is a very big metal table that can accommodate very large slabs or river tables, and it has a giant spindle or a giant router on it with a very wide bit, much wider than something like, you know, what I was using here in the router or even what we use in the CNC machine. I think the mechanism or the bit that it comes with is like 4 or 5 inches, so it can make quick work of a slab, and it is motorized, so you can either have it automated so it'll do it itself, or you can control it with a joystick controller. I'm going to show you a video here of some promotional video taken from the Slab Miser, the Wood Miser website, so you can see kind of how it works. But essentially you can see it's almost like a dumb CNC machine. You can't program it to do intricate things, but it will level a slab easier than a handheld router sled would. But with that added convenience and size and power comes big costs. I believe the last time I checked, that Slab Miser device was starting for like a 5x8 or something. Don't quote me on this, the size, but I think it starts around 16 or 17,000 US dollars, which realistically is getting into lower end CNC machine equivalent to that size. Avid CNC, for example, makes CNC kits that you can build in your own shop. And definitely for less money than $17,000, you can get an equivalent sized CNC machine with a 2 or 3 horsepower spindle that will level slabs and river tables all day long. Plus, will give you the ability to program it to do all the other cool things that a CNC machine can do, like engraving and cutting and all that stuff. So if you are not comfortable with, you know, programming and software and stuff, the Slab Miser might be for you. But if you're looking for the best value, I would honestly go with a bigger format CNC machine for around the same price. Okay, we covered the planer, we covered the slab levelers and, you know, the in-between hybrid type of systems. I want to talk about a CNC machine. This right here is our Axiom AR16 4x4 CNC machine, which means it will do essentially 4x4 feet or 48 inch by 48 inch. That's not huge, but for most people who are making smaller projects, coffee tables, or definitely charcuterie boards, it's more than enough. They certainly have larger CNC machines, which of course you pay for, but the CNC machines are really kind of the top of the pay scale or price scale when you're talking about ways to level a slab. Again, before you get to the big time savers or the big, you know, huge wide format industrial planers that are really for really big shops and commercial operations, CNC machines are not that kind of money in general, but they're still expensive. This Axiom AR16, I believe, is about 15,000 US dollars plus shipping and the accessories. So it's not a cheap solution. Now, essentially, if you aren't familiar with a CNC machine, it uses a gantry and a spindle, which is much like a router, to move along an X, Y, and Z up and down axis. So it is computer controlled. You can design the layout in your software. But in terms of how we're going to use it for slab leveling, we're going to use a very similar bit to what we would use in our regular router and the slab leveler, which is a slab leveling bit or a spoil board bit. It's called the spoil board on a CNC machine for a reason. It is to be spoiled. It's replaceable and it's meant to be consistently re-leveled or replaced. If we just had the aluminum or metal table, if our CNC project, our bit, went through our material into the table, that would be bad. So essentially we have a sacrificial board or a spoil board, which is what this MDF is on this machine, and that is the bit to level it. Now, whether we're leveling the spoil board or a piece of like a river table or a epoxy resin and wood project or just a solid wood slab, the mechanism's the same. We're going to go to our software, we're going to lay out how big the slab is or how big our piece is. We're going to set our starting position. We're going to set our height or level as to where the bit meets the top surface of your material, and then we're going to run our program. It really I mean, this might sound complicated, but it's really quite easy. The advantage of this, of course, is compared to, say, a slab leveler, is you can now do this fully automatically. You can start your program, walk away and work on something else. And of course, there's a lot more capability. It's not just for slab leveling. You can, engrave with it. You can cut custom shapes with it. You can make 3D objects with it to a certain height, because obviously you've got a limited height here on the gantry. But it has a lot more features and advantages than a slab leveler or even something like the Slab Miser by Wood-Mizer does. So what I'm going to actually show you now is how we level a small river table with a CNC machine. We're going to go over the computer, set our parameters, and run the program and let the CNC machine do its work, just like we did for the planer. All right, let's get this started by moving our gantry out of the way. The gantry is this entire chassis top here with our spindle on it. Just moving it out of the way so I can put my slab down and secure it. Some CNC machines have vacuum tables attached to them, which will literally suck your piece down, so you don't actually need clamps. This CNC machine does not, so we do need to clamp our piece down to make sure it doesn't run away on us. I'm going to go grab our tabletop. Now this, just like you would with a planer, we're going to actually need to level both sides. Which side you choose to do at once, I'm not sure it really matters. I'm going to arbitrarily choose this one, but the key is that you want to actually level your piece, whether you're using your planer or your CNC machine or your slab leveler, before you actually trim it up. Because if you start trimming and your bottom, your top's not flat or level, you might end up trimming a side or whatever on an angle. So it's really important that you level your piece before you actually do your trimming and, of course, getting to that final sanding stage. So I'm going to line this up here. I'm going to go over and grab our series of clamps. Definitely the time that I want to have the vacuum option for the table, but if you're not doing a lot of slab leveling with your CNC, probably unnecessary. As you can see, this works just as well. We're going to line up our bit and we're going to measure out this so we can go over to our computer and figure out our programming. All right, so our piece is 18.5 by 36.5. So we're going to give it a little bit of extra room there. We want the actual bit to go a little bit past the extents, but not too much as to hit these the clamps that we have here. Now our height really doesn't matter right now, but it's 2 inches, but we actually want to get it down to the minimum level, right? So we need to figure out what the minimum level is, and that's the amount of depth we're gonna have to determine to take off in our program. So, the highest level here is about 2 1/8, that's 2 there, but really where that resin is, we've got 1 3/4. We'll probably wanna go a little bit below that. So in our program, we're gonna say, okay, we've got a 2 1/8 inch thick slab or 2 1/8 inch thick piece of material, and we want to go down to a little less than 1 3/4 inches. Let's go. All right, Invectric, which is a popular CNC software, I'm going to set our width as 19.5, and our height, I think, what I say was going to be 38 or 37. Let's call it 38. Our thickness of the material is the thickest it actually is right now, which I believe was 2 1/8. All right, so we've got our material there. What we're going to do is we're going to just make a simple slab leveling program by creating an equal-sized rectangle. We're going to choose our end mill. So the end mill is the actual router bit or the spindle bit, the CNC bit. That is actually attached to our spindle, and that's programmed in our tool database. So I don't have it here and here, so I'm actually just going to add it really, really quickly to specify what the size is. It is 1 1/4 carbide tip bit from Amana, and we're just setting our pass depth as 1/8 of an inch. Step over at 50%, and we're going to set the speed at 7,500 RPM. And the feed rate of about 250 inches per minute. We want to go down 1/2 inch exactly, right? So the cut depth is 1/2 inch. We have our spoil board bit selected. We're going to hit calculate, and it's going to generate the program automatically that we'll be able to preview here, as you can see. as the spoil board bit goes, or the slab leveling bit, spoil board bit goes around and around and around, starts in the center, and it's going to do multiple passes here to level out that slab, and then we can do the same thing over and over. The key thing is that we have specified the height of that slab at 2 1/8, so you want to make sure that when we set up our bit over there, that we've got this right on top at that 2 1/8, the highest level, and then set that as our origin or our starting position. So let's save this program to our USB stick. We'll bring it over to the CNC machine and we'll run it. Back at the CNC machine, we've got our USB drive installed. We're going to select that file that we created. Just going to preview it there on the screen. Now we're going to install the correct bit that we've set in our program. So I'm going to take off this guy. Now we have to set our origin, which basically means the XY start position being here and the depth. We've already determined that this corner is pretty much the highest out of the entire slab, and that's that 2 1/4 inch, or sorry, 2 1/8 inch level we were discussing over when we were programming, setting up our software. So we're just going to bring the bit over, and you're going to do the center of the bit, because it's the center of the spindle that's the origin, not the edge of the bit. So that's roughly center. If we were actually doing like a precise CNC project, we want to be a little bit more careful, but we've got a little bit of room to play with here. And then we're going to lower it just so that bit grazes the top, and then we're going to set that as the Z0 or the Z origin. So clear Z, that sets it as the top essentially, saying that, okay, now we're at the very top of the material, and then we're going to set XY to 0, and you can see now 0, 0, 0, X is 0, Y is 0, Z is 0. That means this is our origin point. We're then going to bring this back up, attach our vacuum hose, or we've got our vacuum hose attached. We're going to turn on our vacuum system, and we're going to start the program. It's really that easy. Well, I just finished cleaning up that giant mess of sawdust and resin debris created by our CNC machine. It should really demonstrate just how much material comes off these things in the planing or leveling process. It can be a lot, so you definitely want to have a good vacuum system in place, especially if you're using a CNC machine or a slab leveler. If you're just leveling wood and you've got a slab leveler, you could take it outside and create free mulch. But in most cases where you're collecting resin and wood, you want to obviously have a way to capture that. You don't want to just let that fly. I hope this video shed some light on the tools and machines available to you that are used for leveling slabs and planing pieces. Starting with something like our basic shop planer, which can be had from anywhere from $400 to $700. In this case, this DeWalt machine over here does 13 inches wide. It's not going to do a wide tabletop. It is good for small resin and wood or solid wood projects under 13 inches in width. So if you are starting out here and you're doing resin and wood projects, especially charcuterie boards or small resin art, then I'd honestly recommend you get a shop planer. It doesn't have to be this particular one. That could be a cheaper one, but certainly it's going to help you. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you stress. It's going to make slab leveling leveling and planing things much easier. I certainly could have done this with a slab leveler, but I've got to fix it down into the slab leveler. I've got to set up my bits. I've got to manually do it back and forth. I've got to create a mess. It's going to take way more time to level this on a slab leveler than it would be a planer that can accommodate the size. Now, of course, with that we're talking about the slab levelers. They do have their place as a mid-range solution to leveling big slabs and tables. They are perfect. You can make a slab leveler for as little as $50 out of spare wood, or you can buy a commercially available solution on the market anywhere from $600 to $1,200. That's going to level a decent sized table or a large wood slab. And of course, going to the next step after that is the automated processes, whether it be the slightly automated one like the Slab Miser from Woodmiser, or going up to a CNC machine. Obviously, once you go up to that level, you're talking bigger money. You know, our CNC machine here, as I indicated, was $15,000 or $16,000, and it's good for a 4x4 surface. And they can certainly get much more expensive than that. You can spend 30, 40, 50, 70 grand on a large format CNC. But you do get that slab leveling ability, but you also get a huge range of automated benefit. Now, we're not going to cover in this video because this is part of our Resin Wood Basics series, and this video is focused on slab leveling and planing. But the very next steps in this process is going to be sanding or shaping. So if we wanted to add a charcuterie board handle here to grip that board, we would do that now. And in the case of this, we would probably router out the edge and then go over with our sanding, you know, starting with 80 grit and going up to maybe 1,000 grit, and then obviously going to our finishing stages with our oil or spray or whatever we're going to do. All those things are covered in other videos in this Resin Wood Basics series. So if you are getting into this and you want to learn more about creating pieces like this, please subscribe to us here on YouTube and make sure you check out each and every module of that series. We go from everything from sourcing the wood and buying the wood and prepping the wood to actually creating a finished piece and everything in between. So it's very helpful, especially if you're just getting into this. And again, I thank you for watching this video. Please make sure you subscribe to us here on YouTube. Please hit that like button, and I will see you in the next video. Wait, you made it all the way to the end of this video, which means you get an exclusive 10% discount on anything from craftelements.com or totalboat.com. All you need to do is enter coupon code ERWBVS at checkout. That's ERWBVS. This coupon code is going to get you an instant 10% discount on any of the time-saving molds, templates, or tools at craftelements.com, or head over to totalboat.com and use the code to get some amazing epoxy resin at a 10% discount.